Okay, thank you very much for joining me once again. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and in this video I will be discussing lambda functions, filter and map in Python. I will explain how each of them works, and then we'll build a small project along with it. When we talk about lambda, filter and map, there are tools that are very useful for writing concise and readable code, especially when dealing with functions and iterable transformation. Let's first of all start with lambda. What is a lambda function? So lambda function is an anonymous function. Okay, it's a small anonymous function defined using the lambda keyword. So when we want to define a lambda, we use the anonymous keyword lambda. Okay, when we define a lambda like this, then we have an argument followed by the expression, okay, colon and then expression. Okay, so this is how you declare a lambda function. Now here, if we want to create a function that are 10 to a given number, how do we do it? We will create a function. In case you are new to function, you can check my older video on functions in Python. So if we want to add 10 to a given number, for example, we'll do something like this. We'll write def, we call the function name add, and then the function will take an argument, let's say x, and then in here we are now going to return our parameter with an added 10. So how do we do? Say return x then plus 10. Whenever this function is called, is going to return x with 10 added to it. We will now call the add function, and then we'll now provide for add 5. Let's print a variable. Let's say c equal to, and then we print c, for example. I'm still using the same file I used for Python, so I'll call Python and then call variable, sorry for the name of the file. So when we hit enter, we'll have 15 returned to us. Okay, we'll have 15 returned to us. So if we are to write all of this in a lambda code, we'll have a variable. So let's call it add underscore number, and then I'll say equal to, then call the lambda keyword. First thing is the argument followed by expression. Okay, I'll now say plus 10. I need to call this lambda function. I'll call it the same way I call this function here, and then okay, so in this case I want 5 to be added. So what should be returned to us? Run it. So you can see that we have 15 printed for us. So this is how lambda functions work. So first is you have to when you're declaring a lambda function, you have the keyword followed by the argument followed by the expression, and when you are calling the lambda function, you call it with the same way you are calling the normal Python function. Okay, so you call the variable that is holding the lambda function, and then you add the argument. How about map? Let's talk about map, for example. So the map function applies a given function to all items in an input list or any other iterable like a list, a tuple or set. You can then convert this map object to a list or tuple. A map function applies a given function to all items in an input list and return a map object. So we can say you have a map like this. Okay, you have a map, and inside a map you have a function, you have an iterable. So this is how you create a map. So what this is telling us is that the map function will apply a given function to all items, okay, in an input list. So this is okay, and in this case you can have a function, you can have an iterable, and then return a map, okay, either a list, a tuple, or then you can then convert this map object to a list also. So let's go. So how do we now do it? So let's say we are creating a map. Let's square a number. So find a function, a normal function that square a given number, and then inside the square we have an argument or parameter. So I'll call it x in this case, and then I want to multiply this parameter by itself. So what do? I allow it to return x multiplied by x. Now if I'm not going to use map with the regular function, so let's use a map with the regular functions. So in this case I'm going to have a list of numbers. So in this case I'm going to have numbers like this, and I'll say equal to square bracket, and I'll say 1 2 3 4 5. Let's stop here for now. This number, I want to square them. How do I do it? So I can now use map to square these numbers. I have a function that square a number, and then I have the number that I want them squared. So I can use map to bring everything together, okay, and square them. So I can now have a variable, can write s underscore numbers or s whatever, but just let me use this. So I can do map, and then the map takes a parameter, an iterable, a function. So in this case, I'm going to passing our square function, and then passing the numbers. So passing the numbers, and then I'm now going to, so let's print it. Let me create a variable. So in this case, I can say y. Let's say y equal, okay, I'll call the list constructor, and inside the list constructor, I'll pass in the number variable so that it returns the value in a list. So I can now go ahead and print y, and you can see what we are having. 1 times 1 will always return 1. 2 times 2 will return 4. 3 times 3 9. 4 times 4 16. 5 times 5 is 25. So we have a function. Map allow us to bring our regular function. So we have a function that square a particular value, okay, and it has an argument that square this thing, okay. You know, without using map, we can just call this function. Let's say we can just call this function and say, or we can even have them reprint itself. We can call this function and say square, and then we can pass in value. Because we want to return an iterable, we can map this function, okay, to an iterable, okay. And this can either be a tuple, a list, okay. And then we now call the map function, and then pass in our square function. So what we are saying is come and square these numbers, okay. So we already have a function defined that square numbers, and then we have a numbers in a list, okay, in a list data structure, okay. Then we now call them. Then because we want the return value to be in a list, we call the list constructor, and then we pass in the value we are getting from the map, okay, and then we printed it. So, and that is why we are having this value here, okay. That is how map work in Python. So what you are seeing here is the process of using map with regular function. Then we can also use a map with a lambda function. How can we do that? So if we want to use lambda with a regular function, what we need to do is we need to have a variable. So I'll now call this variable, I'll call a square number, okay, and then I'll say equal to, and inside the map I'll now pass in lambda x as the argument, and then x multiplied by x as the expression, okay. So once I have it like this, I can now go ahead call the number the number list. So if I do number list, a number here, so I should be able to call the list, okay, and then I should be able to now print the list. But then I want them to return just the same way we did here. So I want it to return everything in a list. So I'll bring it down here, and then I'll now call this I'll now call the list constructor, and then passing square number. So I'll call it square number, okay, and then print y. So let's print y. So you can see what we are having. Remember that this one is commented, so it's not this one that is running again. So we are still getting the same result. Why? Because we are using map along with lambda. So look at the code we are having here, and look at the code we are having here. So all of this is written in a simplified. What we are saying is a map function takes functions and iterables, okay. A map function takes functions and iterable. So it can be a regular function or a lambda function, and in this case we are having a lambda function here, and then we are also having a regular function here, okay, and then it's returning everything in a list for us. So this is how using map with lambda work. Then let's talk about filter. The filter function, for example, construct an iterator from element of an iterable, okay, for which a function return true. Okay, this is a big grammar, but let me explain. So the filter is used to filter item from an iterable based on condition. What are we saying? So we can have a filter like this. So what's the expression? Well, how do we write a filter function? So we can have a filter, and then in it takes a parameter, okay, and then we can pass in function and iterable. So it can be function here, we can have a function, and then we can have iterable, a function and iterable. So we can have a function and then an iterable here. All right, so this is how you write your filter function. Okay, so it takes parameter, a function, and what, an iterable. Now let's give an example. So imagine we have a regular function to check if a number is even, for example. So we can do something like this. We can say, okay, let's call it def, and I'll call the function name even underscore num, and then it's going to take parameter x or an argument. Come here, in here I'm going to return the x. So we say return x modulus 2, which will be equal to 0. So this will check if it is an even number or not. So we have this function already. Now let's use filter with a regular function. How do we do it? So we now have our number. So let's bring back our numbers. For example, I'm going to move it here. We now have a number list. Okay, all right, so we have a number list like this, and then we want to filter even number from this number. How do we do it? So we can now just create a variable. So I'll call this variable y, and then equal to, and then call the filter function, and then pass in the numbers like this. Okay, so when I pass in the numbers, I'm also going to pass in the function. So let's pass in the function. I'll say even what, even num. Okay, for us to have it in a list, I need to return it in a list. So what do? I'll call the list constructor. So let me call it variable x equal to, and then I have a list constructor, and inside the list constructor I'm going to pass in turning the value from the, when I print x, for example, let's print x. Okay, so and then there you have. So these are the two even number we have in number. So this is how to use filter functions with what, with regular function. So where you have a regular function that check for even number, and then you have a list the list or an iterable that you want to loop through or to iterate over to check for even number. So you now use filter to filter out even number from that iterable. Okay, so and in this case we are using list. Because filter takes parameter, we have the function, which is in this case the function that check for even number, and then we have the list of numbers that we want to filter even number from, and then we are returning the value as a list. So whatever we are getting from the filter should be in a list. So that's what we are doing here. Okay, so that's why we are passing the y inside the list constructor, and then printing the x, and it's returning the even number for us. So if we increase this to, let's say 6 to 8, for example, we add 6, or let's say we make it 9 and then 10, and then we run, we should be able to have, you can see the even number we now have is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So this is how the filter functions can work with a regular function. You can also use the filter functions with lambda function. How can we do that? So for us to do that, we will need to do something like, so we need a way to create, so I'll call the variable underscore lambda. So I'll call it filter lambda, f underscore lambda. Then we'll now call the filter function, and inside the filter function we'll now pass in filter and our list. Okay, so I'll now call filter, so I can now pass in the lambda function. So I'll call lambda, and then write the expression and the argument. So in this case s is the argument, and the expression is to check for even number. So I'll say x modulus 2, okay, then comma, then I'll now pass in the number list. Okay, our numbers list. I can now return the list, so I'll call the list constructor. So in this case I'll just use s as a variable, and then call the list constructor. I'll call the list constructor, and then pass in the f lambda. Okay, I'll pass in it here. So when we now print s, okay, when we now print x like this, we will now have a lambda, have a filter functions that is using a lambda and then an iterable. So when we run it like this, so you can see what we are getting. We are still getting the same result. So this is how a lambda function can be used with a filter function, or with a regular with an iterable. So remember that this number here is an iterable. Okay, it's a list iterable. We can also combine a map and filter. So what we are trying to do is we can filter the item of an iterable and then apply a function to that filtered item. So how do we do it? So let's say we have a number from 1 to 10, for example. So I'll print this, I'll comment this out. So what did I say? I said that we can also use filter with lambda function, and I said that what the combination of these two would do is that we can combine map and filter to first filter the item of an iterable and then apply a function to the filter item, okay, or vice versa. You can do it all the other way around. And I said that let's say we have a number 1 to 10, for example. So we can have, so let me just call it num because I have number already. So I have num, and then I will now say equal to, then I will now call the list constructor, and inside the list constructor I will now, in the range function, I'm going to say that it should start from 1, okay, and end at 10. Okay, so I will just put 11. All right, so now that I have an iterable, the next thing is I will now need to first filter even number, then square them. So how do I do it? Square even number, or s underscore is, okay, and then num. Okay, so and then I'll say equal to, I will now need to call the map function where I will map lambda with filter. Okay, so I can call lambda like this, then the expression, okay, so I'll say x multiplied by x, and then comma, then I will now do a filter. Okay, I'll now call the function, so I'll now provide, then I can now return everything in a list. So I can call, just permit me to say a, and then call the list constructor, and then pass in the s even number, then I can now print a. So let's print a. All right, so when we run it, okay, we're having error. Filter expected 2 argument but got 1. So where is that? And you can see, so we have 4, 16, 36, 44, 64, 100. Squaring everything and also checking for even numbers. And we can do this, or vice versa. You can also bring a map and then filter. Okay, instead of like this, you can do it in another alternative, so you can alternate them. All right, so this is how you can use filter and lambda to combine, this is how you can combine map and filter to first of all filter even numbers and then square them. This is how you can combine map and filter to filter out even number and square them. One thing you should know about a lambda function is that lambda functions are small anonymous function. They are defined with the lambda keyword. Okay, just like this. So you see how we keep using it. Okay, so it's a keyword and you cannot use it as a variable. The map applies a function to all items in iterable. So the map applies a function to all items. So and that is why anywhere you are seeing that we are using map, there is always what? A function there. Okay, filters item out of an iterable based on functions that return true or false. So and that is what you are seeing here. So filter items out of an iterable based on a function that returns true or false. So these tools, this map, filter and lambda are tools that are very powerful when used together for concise and expressive functional programming in Python. Okay, so we are going to build a program. We're going to develop a program that filters students' grade based on a threshold. Okay, you know that students that go below 45 or 40 in some schools are already going to repeat class. All right, so imagine we are building an application for such school. We can use this tools, Lambda, map, and filter, to do that. So that's what we are going to combine in order to achieve that. So we're going to build a program that filter students grade based on the threshold, either below or above. So how do we do that? So let me comment this print. Okay, student grade, I can call it student, let me just call it like this, just permit me to use this. Okay, it does not take any parameter. We will now collect input, so we can say grade input, or we can say grade, which should be equal to collect grade input, grade input. All right, let's have a grade input. So then we say equal to, we now say input. So we are now asking users to input enter student grades separated by spaces. So do it like this. Okay, so we now have a function that collects. So what do? We need to return a list of grade. So we need to call. So I'll create a variable and I'll call it grades. Okay, and then we'll say equal to, and then we'll now say we'll call the list constructor. Okay, now inside the list constructor we are calling map, so that you can map the input. Okay, so then we need the data type of that data that is coming. Okay, so we need date, then we are now calling the variable. Okay, we're not calling the variable grade input. Okay, grade input, then we are splitting them. That means we are now creating a list separated value with comma. Okay, yeah, all right, something like this. So what we are doing here is we are now saying that, okay, calling map, so that map can map all of the input data we are collecting. You know what we are collecting from data is already in a string, but we need to make it an integer. Okay, and then splitting them by adding comma. So we are calling the dot split method. Okay, so that we can have a list returned to us. Okay, so at the end of the day, the function should return what? The grade. Okay, so we say return grades. All right, like this. Okay, grades. Okay, now we now have a function that asks for input and return grades in a list. Now the next one is we need a way to get the threshold. Okay, so the threshold, like I said, there are schools that you go that a student cannot pass once you are below 45. Once you score anything below 45, you are already going to repeat the class. So let's create a function that check for the threshold. So we say def, and we call it just threshold. Let's just call it threshold, like this. Am I correct? Okay, yeah, let's call it threshold. The threshold we are asking is if we want a score to be below 45 or above 70. So that's what we are going to do. So we are now saying so let me make it, so for clearer purpose I'll just add get, so that I can reuse this as a variable. So I can come here now, call this as a thresh, and then hold, and then I'll say equal to. So I'll now because I need the input to be an integer, I'll say int. Okay, I'll call the int constructor. I'll not ask the user to enter the threshold grade. Enter the threshold grade. So, and then it should be able to return the threshold. So the function should return the threshold. So we say thresh. We have a function that gets students grade. We have a function that gets the threshold we want to check, either 45, 50, 70, 80 or 100. We need another function. This function is the one that is going to filter the grades. Okay, so and before we can filter the grade, we should be able to call this function here, the student grade and the threshold. Okay, so how do we do that? So we're now going to create a function, and then we'll call it filter grades. So say filter underscore grades. Okay, and then it's going to take parameter. I'm going to use grade because that's what I'm getting from the function. So that's what is returning here, grade. And then I'll call it the threshold because that's what is being returned in the second function. So I'll call threshold. Okay, then I'll now have another one, filter type. So what type of filter are we asking? Is it below or above? Okay, then we are now going to filter the grade based on the threshold and the filter type. So the grade is a list of an integer already. If you look at what we are doing here, okay, so this is a list of an integer already. Okay, and then the threshold is also an integer because we are collecting an integer. So the user, the teacher is expected to enter 45, 70 based on the threshold of the school. Then we have the filter type, which is a string type. So a string which will either be below or above. So how do we now do it? So we can do something like this. I can now say if filter equal to above, if filter type equal to above, then it should return the list. Return. So we are calling the list constructor, and then we are filtering. Okay, remember we are calling the filter function and then passing in the lambda. So in this case we have lambda, and then we are calling the grade as our expression, as our argument, sorry, and then the grade. So when the grade is greater than or equal to threshold, then we are now calling the grades. We now have the first condition. Then the second condition will be else if filter type is equal to filter underscore type is equal to below, then filter it. Okay, filter it. It should return a list filtered. So call the list call the return keyword, and then call the list constructor. And inside the list constructor we're going to pass in our filter. Okay, just the same way we did above. Then inside the filter we are going to call lambda. Okay, and then we'll now call grade, and we say that when the grade is less than or equal to threshold, when grade is less than or equal to threshold, okay, then comma, then we'll now call our grades. Okay, like this. Okay, then else if anything else. Okay, in case you are not familiar with else if statement, you can check my video description for the else if statement. Okay, so you can say print. Okay, please choose above or below. Invalid filter type, please choose above or below. Okay, so now that we now have this, now that we've now have a function that filter grades, now let's have the main function now. So we'll now create a main. We can call the grades, which should be equal to, what's the name of our function for grade? It should be student grade. Okay, so we say stu underscore grade. Okay, remember it's a function, so we need our parentheses. Then we also have a threshold, so we say threshold, and then we say equal to, then we call the threshold function. Okay, what's our threshold? Get threshold. Okay, so we can say get threshold. Okay, then you can also call the filter type, so call it filter underscore type. Okay, and then we say equal to, now we'll now say filter grades above or below, so we say above here, comma, below, okay, or below, sorry. So let's have or below. Okay, so we have filter grades below, then the threshold. okay, below the threshold. Okay, then so we are going to call the strip method because we are going to remove the white spaces. Okay, that way we are able to capture whatever the user is entering. So all the white spaces either from the left to the right are removed with this .strip method, and then we're going to make it lower. So whether the user enter a capital letter, what we are collect whatever the program should see is a what, is a lower character. Now, so we can now come down and have our filter grades. So we shall say filter underscore grades, which will be equal to, then we say filter grades, and then here we pass in grades comma threshold, okay, then comma filter type. So we say filter type. All right, like this. We need to print the result, the final result, okay, because after filtering, what do we have? So we can now say, let's print this. Okay, we're going to print the filter grades, print, and then we have filtered grade. So let's have it in a string. So I can say, then I can format it or just put a comma, but then I like formatting, so I'll just come here and put curly braces, and inside the curly braces I can just call the filtered grade. Okay, like this. Okay, so let's run it. Oh yes, it can't run until I call the method. Okay, so because I'm not importing, so I need to have the main call the name from the input. So if and then name. Okay, so like this. So I can now run the program, and it's now asking me to enter students grade separated by space. It is 34, 45, 57, 89, 90, 20, 34, 57. Okay, all right, don't do. So hit enter, and then it's now asking me what's the threshold. So should it be above or below 70? So let it be 45. Okay, and it should be above. Yeah, okay, so copy this, then you can see that it's now returning our filtered grade. So it's now starting from 45, 67, and if we run again and we repeat the same thing, we just copy this, we just paste it back. Okay, if we run again and I paste it back, okay, and I hit enter, and this time I say it should start from 70 for example, and then it should be above, okay, or below 70. If I say below 70, it's going to give me all the field, so you can see it's starting from 34, 45, 67, 20, 34, 50, 47. So it's not going to give me anything higher than what? Higher than 70. And you can see that any other one apart from, so after 67, every other one is above what? 70. All right, so this is how you can combine map, filter, and lambda function to create a program. These tools are powerful, okay, and they are very powerful and very useful when you want to write a very concise, readable code. Okay, so don't forget to like this video, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share this video. Thank you very much, and give a comment, give your like. I'm waiting for it.